I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. Suppose you're a baseball fan living in New York and you want to see a perfect game get thrown. It's insanely rare. There have only been 24 of them in the history of Major League Baseball, and only one in the last decade. When you think of all the games that take place in MLB history, and the fact that there is about 15 a night for 6 straight months, your odds of seeing a perfect game are about the same as your odds of winning multiple lotteries. However, you have a dream one night that you're in the ballpark where a perfect game is being thrown. The Arizona Diamondbacks are taking on the Los Angeles Dodgers, and it comes to you in a dream that this man right here, Zach Gallen, throws a perfect game against the best offense in baseball. Despite the fact that Gallen already faced the Dodgers a few weeks ago and got shelled, getting yanked after 4 innings, allowing 10 hits and 5 runs, and despite the fact that we're halfway through the season and the Dodgers hadn't even so much as been shut out yet, you dream that Gallen throws the perfect game and makes history. And after you have this dream, you say to yourself, "Oh crap, I need to see this take place." So you wake up in a cold sweat, you book the first flight out from New York to Los Angeles, you fly across the country, and you get a ticket inside Dodger Stadium to watch Zach Gallen on the mound that day take on the Los Angeles Dodgers. Because it came to you in a dream that Gallen was going to throw a perfect game on this very day, and you needed to be there. To the shock of absolutely no one, Gallen does not throw a perfect game, nor does he even come close. Seems like a really freaking stupid thing to do, right? Spend all that money to fly across the country that day because something unrealistic came to you in a dream that was never going to happen. And sure enough, it doesn't happen. Well, I bring that up because this man that you're watching right now is Buffalo Bills running back OJ Simpson. And obviously, he did some things off the field that overshadowed just how good of a running back and how good of a player he was in the NFL. During that 1972 season, Simpson was one of the best runners in all of football, to the surprise of absolutely no one. And one former Bills running back wanted to see Simpson achieve history because it came to him in a dream, even though there was never any chance in the world that Simpson was going to be able to pull it off. And when you realize just what Simpson had to do in order to achieve this mark, yeah, you're gonna think the man was absolutely delusional. Because this is the story behind former Buffalo Bills running back Gilchrist and his bizarre dream about OJ Simpson that lent itself to one of the strangest stories of the entire 1972 season and one of the strangest stories of OJ Simpson's career that you've never heard of. Before I talk about the actual dream in question, make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL. So if you like learning more about some obscure things that you've never heard of before, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for your support, as every like and subscriber helps as we try and inch closer and closer to 70,000 subscribers. And with that in mind, let's talk about the man who really thought the juice would be loose. Before I talk about the actual mark in question that Gilchrist thought that Simpson was going to hit, we need some context to understand just who this man right here, Gilchrist, was. In terms of peaks, there might not have been a better running back in the history of the American Football League at his peak than Gilchrist. Was he a head case at times? Absolutely. Could he have played longer in the AFL if he didn't feud with everyone along the way? You bet. But man, Gilchrist was a heck of a runner after coming over from Canada, and was a staple on those mid-60s Bills teams. In his first season in the league in 1962, he led the league with 1,096 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns, being named an AFL All-Star in the process, as well as the AFL Player of the Year. He followed that up in 1963 with another All-Star season and a league-high 12 rushing touchdowns, then followed that up in 1964 with a third straight All-Star season, a league-high 981 rushing yards, and a league-high 6 rushing touchdowns, and he followed that up in 1965 as a member of the Denver Broncos with a fourth straight All-Star season and a fourth straight season where he led the league with 6 rushing touchdowns. Only 3 players in the short but storied history of the AFL had over 4,000 rushing yards and 35 rushing touchdowns, with that list consisting of Abner Hayes, Paul Lowe, and none other than Cookie Gilchrist. Pretty good company to be in, if I do say so myself. But of all the games that Gilchrist played with Buffalo, the best one he had, by far, was unfortunately one where there's no footage of. On December 8th, 1963, the 5-6-1 Buffalo Bills took on the New York Jets, needing to win this game to stay alive in the AFL East Division race and keep pace with the Boston Patriots. And Gilchrist completely took this game over, as not only did the Bills win in dominant fashion, taking it 45-14, but Gilchrist had a whopping 243 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. It seriously might be, considering the circumstances and how many times he found the end zone, the best game by any running back ever. The Bills won the game, won the following week, once again against the Jets, and advanced to the playoffs as a result of Gilchrist and his hard running. But in case you're wondering, yes, that 243 rushing yards was a franchise record. It was the most rushing yards in a game in AFL history, and the second most rushing yards by anyone in pro football in the storied history of that sport, with the only mark eclipsing that being when Spec Sanders had 250 yards for the New York Yankees in a 1947 game against the Chicago Rockets in the AAFC. To this day, Gilchrist's rushing total still ranks inside the top 20 all-time for any player, and it seemed like a mark that would be very hard to top. Seeing as not only was it a franchise record, but by this point in our story in 1972, it was literally the second best rushing performance of all time, seeing someone pass this mark would be nothing short of miraculous. However, in 1972, the Bills had a really good running back on their roster, as they had this man right here, former first overall pick, OJ Simpson. The Bills themselves were a really bad football team. Halfway through the 1972 season, they were sitting at 2-5, 5 games back of first place, and with no hope whatsoever at making the playoffs. But it wasn't the fault of OJ Simpson, who was averaging close to 100 rushing yards per game, sitting at 678 yards on 4.7 yards per carry, and who was looking well on pace to lead the league in rushing for the first time ever. Simpson had eclipsed the 100-yard mark 3 times already in the first 7 games, including a 189-yard outing against the Pittsburgh Steelers on nearly 9 yards per carry, and a 138-yard outing against his future team, the San Francisco 49ers, in one of just 2 wins for the Bills so far on the season. Keep in mind, while 189 yards is obviously very impressive and is a great game, it is still nowhere close to 243. It's like the difference between hitting 2 home runs in a game and hitting 4. There's levels to this. But Cookie Gilchrist thought that this man right here, OJ Simpson, could break his rushing record for a single game. He thought that he was going to get 244 rushing yards next time out because he had a dream on Saturday night that it was going to happen. Keep in mind, Gilchrist did not do this every single week. This was the first and only time this happened. And Gilchrist didn't want to miss out on his record getting broken. Some people are very stingy about their records, and some have the belief that records are meant to be broken. And Gilchrist was in that latter category. He wanted to see OJ break the record. So he decided after waking up that night, screw it, I'm flying across the country to watch this game. Gilchrist lived in Los Angeles, and he booked the first flight out to Buffalo so that he could be there when OJ Simpson broke his mark and ran for over 243 yards in a single game. How the flights worked out that way? I have no idea, seeing as it was a 1 o'clock game in Buffalo. But Gilchrist, despite starting the day in Los Angeles, found a way to make it work and get on the field at War Memorial Stadium for Buffalo's game, all because of a dream he had. The opponent that the Bills were set to face on this day? Yeah, that's where this story gets really stupid. Because it's one thing to have this dream and think, you know what, OJ Simpson might break my record today. It's another thing when it's against the 1972 Miami Dolphins. In case you didn't know, the Dolphins were kind of good that year. They would finish the season undefeated, remaining to this day the only team to finish a season in the Super Bowl era with a perfect record across the regular season and the postseason. And while there were many reasons for the success of the Dolphins that year, Perhaps the biggest one was their stout defense, led by defensive coordinator Bill Arnsparger. No one could do anything against Miami, as they were number 1 in the league in points allowed and in yards allowed, with the bulk of that success being in stopping the run, where the Dolphins allowed the 3rd fewest rushing yards and the 3rd fewest rushing touchdowns in all of football. The average team in 1972 allowed 140 rushing yards per game. 7 games into the 1972 campaign, and the Dolphins were allowing just 123. The Dolphins played the Bills earlier in 1972, 2 weeks before this game, and OJ Simpson did next to nothing, as he had just 57 yards rushing on under 4 yards per carry. For a man averaging about 100 yards per game, Simpson picked up roughly half of that. And 7 games into the season, no one, not a single player, had picked up more than 90 rushing yards on the Dolphins, let alone 100, let alone 150, let alone 200, let alone anywhere close to Gilchrist and his 243 yards. But this dream was just way too powerful. Despite Simpson having to go up once again against this defense right here that would stop any running back in their tracks, Gilchrist thought that this was going to be the day that Simpson broke his record, as in, not just a franchise record, but the most rushing yards by any player in the last 25 years in a single game. Said Gilchrist upon having this dream and premonition, "I wanted to be there when OJ Simpson broke my record. I wanted to be the first to shake his hand." And it's going to come as a surprise to absolutely no one that as you're watching highlights of this game, which the Dolphins won 30-16 to improve to 8-0, there is a certain player that's missing from this footage. That's right, OJ Simpson. Because just like the first time, and just like they had done all season, the Dolphins completely bottled him up. Simpson finished this game with just 45 yards rushing on well under 4 yards per carry, which, to be fair to Gilchrist, was only about 200 yards shy of his record. So close, you almost had it, you almost saw history. The Dolphins didn't do a lot offensively on this day in the passing game, as Earl Morrall went just 5 for 14, completing roughly 33% of his passes, and only finishing the game with 73 net passing yards, even throwing a pick 6 before the halftime break. But the Dolphins won it on the strength of their defense, just as they had done all season, as the Bills mustered up just 9 points through their offense. If Gilchrist wanted to see his record get broken, he would have to wait for some other time and find another flight, because it was never going to be this game, never in a million years. It's not as though Gilchrist chose a game against the worst rushing defense in football and a team that Simpson had 230 yards on the previous time. He thought his dream would become a reality, even though every single stat and every single shred of common sense was completely against it. Absolutely insane. Of course, OJ Simpson would eventually break Gilchrist's single-game record, and he actually did it twice, doing it against the New England Patriots on opening day of the 1973 season, and doing it against the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving in 1976, making him the only running back in NFL history to have multiple games of 250-plus rushing yards. But at least the game that he did it and eclipsed that mark, you can understand why. The Patriots had the league's worst rushing defense by every metric in 1972, finishing at the bottom of the league in rushing yards allowed, rushing touchdowns allowed, and yards per carry allowed. And OJ Simpson had a game against them in 1972 where he ran for over 100 yards. It wasn't, well, this game right here against an undefeated team that shut him down the first time and had the #1 defense in the league and was literally without any blemishes to their record whatsoever. So let this be a lesson to anyone watching this. If something comes to you in a dream that tells you to book a flight across the country so you can witness history, when there is a 0.0% chance in real life that this historic thing happens, save your money and don't do it. Just because it comes to you in a dream doesn't mean it's going to be reality. Because on this day in 1972, Cookie Gilchrist's REM pattern got caught with its hands in the cookie jar. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes.
And make sure to join me live as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.